Her daughter whispered, "She's not even family anymore," at her own bridal shower. Sarah Whitmore, widow of Caleb Whitmore, and stepmother for over 20 years, didn't look away. Emily, the bride-to-be she'd helped raise, thought the insult would fade into the noise. By morning, the trust Caleb left, and Emily's claim to it, would be under Sarah's control alone. She'd been both mother and protector. Now she was the executor of the family's legacy. And when Emily came for what she thought was hers, her father's letter would decide her fate. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. The air went still when she said, "You're not even real family anymore." I stood just inside the doorway, clutching the gift I'd wrapped in soft gold paper. My heels felt too high, my dress suddenly too plain among the glittering chiffon and pastel satins moving through the room. Emily spotted me from across the buffet table. Her smile, the one I used to think could light up a room, flickered on and off in a second. She reached for a stack of paper plates, handed me one without breaking eye contact with the woman beside her. The edges of the plate bent slightly under my fingers. "Help yourself," she said, her voice bright but hollow, like a store clerk rehearsing a greeting. I stepped aside, letting the next person pass, and found a spot near the fruit tray. That's when it happened. Emily leaned toward her cousin, voice dropping just enough that it wasn't meant for me yet, close enough that it couldn't have been accidental. "She's not even real family anymore." It landed in my chest like something heavy and sharp at the same time. My fork hovered over the melon cubes, suddenly ridiculous in its weight. I kept my head down, jaw fixed, as if concentrating on choosing fruit, but the words burned through the soft chatter and clinking glasses around us. This wasn't the first time she'd been cool to me, not by a long shot, but this felt permanent. Not a bad mood, not stress, a verdict. I straightened, forcing a polite smile at the woman across from me, though my throat felt tight. The urge to say something, anything, flickered and died under the watchful eyes of guests who had no idea what had just been said. Lucas was near the drinks table talking to one of Emily's friends. I caught his eye for a fraction of a second, but he looked away too quickly, as if the condensation on his soda can had suddenly become fascinating. My own son choosing silence. The rest of the afternoon blurred into a loop of polite laughter and safe topics. I commented on the weather, the hors d'oeuvres, the floral arrangements, anything but the iceberg that had just cracked the floor beneath us. Emily moved through the room like a hostess from a magazine spread, every hug and laugh perfectly timed, never lingering near me for more than a few seconds. When the last gift was opened and the guests began drifting toward the door, I slipped out quietly, my hands trembling just enough to make finding my car keys a small battle. In the driver's seat, the silence hit harder than the music inside. I stared at the steering wheel, the imprint of her words still pressing on my chest. It wasn't just the cruelty, it was the finality. I reached for my phone and typed with fingers that weren't quite steady. "I can't do this anymore." Karen's name glowed on the screen as the message sent. The parking lot shimmered under the late afternoon sun, but I barely saw it. My hands stayed in my lap, my body heavy against the seat. The phone buzzed once. Her reply was short, unhesitating, and left no room for the limbo I'd been living in. "You need to confront her before it's too late." I spent the next few days in silence, while the coldness between us grew. It wasn't the kind of silence that soothes. It was the kind that hangs in corners, follows you from room to room, and makes the hum of the refrigerator sound like a clock ticking down. I didn't text her. I didn't call. The phone stayed face down on the kitchen counter like it might bite me. Every time I walked past it, I felt that tight pull in my chest, the echo of her voice at the bridal shower, thin and sharp. "She's not even real family anymore." On the third day Lucas called. His tone was casual, like nothing had happened. He mentioned the new flowers for the wedding, the way the catering deposit had just cleared, the song list Emily was finalizing for the reception. His words skated over the ice between us. Never looking down, I almost told him, Almost asked if he'd heard her. If he'd heard all of it. But something in his voice warned me. Maybe it was loyalty to her. Maybe it was fear. I let him finish talking, and hung up with a hollow thanks for calling. Nights were worse. I'd lie in bed replaying it, changing the way I might have responded, rewriting the script in my head. In one version I laughed it off. In another I called her out in front of everyone. In the version that kept me awake the longest, I simply left before she could finish the sentence. By Friday, Karen had had enough of my quiet. She showed up with her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense knot, a grocery bag hooked over her arm. She made tea without asking, leaning on the counter as the kettle hissed. "You're letting her write this story," she said. "You need to write your own." "I can't," I murmured. "She's my daughter." "Then be her mother," Karen shot back, setting the mug in front of me. "And a mother doesn't let her child walk all over her dignity." I looked away. Love can make you blind, but it can also make you deaf to every warning, every truth you don't want to hear. The mail came late that afternoon. A thin stack of envelopes slid through the slot, and onto the rug by the door. On top was an ivory card with raised lettering, my name printed in looping script. I opened it at the counter. The wedding invitation was all blush and cream, embossed with roses. Emily's name filled the center in gold foil. There was no mention of me, no together with their families, no acknowledgement that I even existed in the equation. My fingers tightened on the card until the paper creaked. By evening I was pacing the living room. The invitation lay on the coffee table like a dare. I picked up my phone and called Karen. "I can't do this anymore." Her voice was steady. "Then do something about it. You have the power." The line went quiet for a beat, just our breathing. I hung up and went to the hall closet, kneeling on the hardwood until my knees ached. Behind the winter boots and the box of Christmas lights, there was a weathered cedar box I hadn't opened in years. It smelled faintly of cedar and thyme when I lifted the lid. Inside were photographs. Lucas as a boy, Emily with her first bicycle, cards from anniversaries, Caleb's watch wrapped in tissue, and beneath it all, a cream envelope with my name in his handwriting. The paper was heavier than I remembered, the kind that carries weight even before you read the words. My late husband's seal was still unbroken. I sat back on my heels, the letter balanced in my hands, my pulse loud in my ears. I had forgotten I even kept it. The room seemed to still, the shadows lengthening around me as I slid a finger under the flap. The seal gave way with a soft crack. I didn't read it yet, just held it, feeling the edges, the decades in between. Somewhere in those pages were instructions he'd left for me, words I never thought I'd need. But now they might be the only thing standing between me and the erasure my daughter had already begun. The letter was a reminder of the past, and a hint of what could come. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, the cedar scent from the box still lingering faintly in the air. The flap was open now, but I hadn't yet dared to pull the letter. My fingers rested on the edge, feeling the thickness of the paper as though the weight of Caleb's hand still pressed it there. When I finally slid it out, the pages unfolded with a whisper, like they'd been holding their breath all these years. His handwriting, strong, deliberate, pulled me back instantly. I could hear his voice in each loop and line, could see him bent over the desk in his study, that little furrow between his brows he got when something mattered. "Sarah," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I want you to have these words in case the years after me are not as kind as I hoped they'd be." I blinked hard, my thumb smoothing the crease in the paper. He spoke of the family, how he'd worked to build not just security, but something that would outlast him. He mentioned Lucas, his steady nature. He mentioned Emily by name, not as an outsider, not as a guest. "She's to be treated as a daughter," he wrote, "and in return she must treat you as family, always." The phrasing tightened something in my chest. Even in his absence, he'd left space for respect to go both ways. Then came the part I'd never known about. "In the trust I have included Emily as a potential beneficiary, but only if she honors you in word and in deed. Should she fail to do so, the distribution is at your sole discretion. This is not punishment, it is protection for you and for the legacy we built together." I read that sentence 3 times, my pulse loud in my ears. My hands trembled, not with greed but with the sudden knowledge that this wasn't just about my feelings anymore. It was about something far larger, a thread of history and intention that reached back to Caleb and forward to everything we'd worked for. It wasn't money I cared about. It was the fact that he'd seen this possibility, that he'd prepared for it, that he'd trusted me to act. I set the letter down gently, as though it might shatter. The quiet of the kitchen felt different now, less like a wait, more like a pause before a step forward. The temptation to call Emily then and there was sharp. But no, this couldn't be emotional. It had to be precise, measured. I needed to choose my moment, and I needed to walk into it with more than hurt feelings. I made a list that night, documents to review, phrases in the trust to highlight, the exact language of that clause Caleb had tucked away like a locked door. Only I could open. By the time the clock struck midnight, my plan was clear enough to settle the thudding in my chest. I didn't want to fight for the sake of fighting. I wanted recognition, respect, and if she wouldn't give it freely, then she'd have to face the terms her own name was tied to. I picked up my phone, hesitating over Lucas's contact. My thumb hovered for a beat before I typed, "I need to speak to Emily about something important." The message sent, the little delivered note blinked beneath it. I left the phone on the counter and went to rinse my cup, the steady splash of water in the sink louder than it should have been. When the reply came, the screen lit the dim kitchen like a match in the dark. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." The air in the room shifted when I said, "I have something to say to you, Emily." I'd chosen the dining room deliberately. Wide table, good light, nowhere to hide behind casual furniture. The trust letter sat in its envelope at the center, the paper weighted with Caleb's old brass letter opener. When the knock came, I didn't move right away. Let her wait a second. Let her know this wasn't a visit for tea. Emily stepped inside without meeting my eyes, her phone in hand, thumbs busy. She wore a fitted blazer and a look that belonged more in a boardroom than her mother's house. "I don't have long," she said, brushing past me toward the table. I stayed standing. She glanced up at that half amusement, half irritation, but she sat. I took my chair opposite her, slid the envelope into the center space between us. "I have something to say to you, Emily." That was when her phone hit the table, her head tilting in mock curiosity. "This sounds serious." I opened the envelope, drew the letter out carefully, flattening the folds with my palm. My voice stayed steady. "You're not even family anymore. I'd like to see if that's true." Her laugh was short, practiced. "Oh God, are we really doing this? You're taking things way too personally." I began to read. Caleb's words filled the space between us, each one more deliberate than the last. She started with a smirk, leaning back in her chair, tapping one manicured finger against the but when I reached the clause, the one about her treatment of me being a condition for her inclusion in the trust, her body shifted forward a fraction. The smirk loosened. I kept reading. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every syllable carried the weight of a man she'd once called family and could no longer charm. When I finished, I folded the letter, set it gently back on the table. "I've waited a long time to see if you could live up to this." Emily's eyes darted to the envelope, then back to me. "So what? You think you can just wave that around like a magic wand? You don't even, Emily." I cut her off without volume, just precision. "I have the legal right to decide, to distribute the trust as I see fit. If you meet the terms, you're in. If you don't, you're out." That hit. Her gaze narrowed, her hands clasped tight in her lap now. She tried for a laugh, but it caught halfway brittle. "You wouldn't, you'd never. You've been betting on that," I said, leaning forward just enough to close the space she'd kept between us. "Betting that I'd choose silence over confrontation, that I'd rather keep the peace than keep my dignity. But I'm done." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the faint tick of the old wall clock. She stared at me like she was recalculating something. Risk-reward, the number of people she thought would take her side. Finally, she pushed her chair back so suddenly it scraped the floor. She stood, palms flat on the table. "You can't do this." She tried to tear it apart, but the truth held steady. Emily didn't slam the door when she left. She yanked it so hard the frame rattled. The sound echoed through the house, vibrating in my ribs long after she was gone. I stayed seated at the table, my fingers still resting on the folded letter. It felt almost warm from where my palm had pressed it flat. I didn't need to read it again. I knew every word now, and I knew exactly what she was going to do next. By the following afternoon, Karen called. "She's talking," she said without preamble. "Not just talking, telling people you're holding the trust hostage, making it sound like you've gone power mad." I closed my eyes. Of course she is. It didn't take long to confirm. At the grocery store, Miss Colton from 2 streets over leaned toward me in the cereal aisle and said, "I'm so sorry you're having trouble with Emily." Her tone carried the careful sympathy of someone who'd only heard one side. I went home with milk, bread, and a knot in my stomach that wouldn't untangle. Karen came over that evening, legal pad in hand. "If she's going to make this public, you need to be ready to make it legal." We spread the documents across my dining table. Caleb's original trust, the amendments, Karen's neat handwriting filled page after page, as I dictated dates, events, and the ways Emily's treatment of me had been less family and more calculated erosion. By the end of the night, my resolve felt less like a raw nerve, and more like a spine. A week later, Lucas stopped by. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. "I've been hearing things," he started, rubbing the back of his neck, "from Emily. But I've also been remembering things." I let him in, poured coffee, waited. He took a long breath. "The way she talks to you, it's not right. I used to tell myself you two just didn't click. But it's more than that. I've seen her push you aside in front of people. I've seen her—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything before." The apology didn't fix everything, but it slotted a missing piece into place. I wasn't imagining this. Karen and I made an appointment with a family estate lawyer downtown. Her office smelled faintly of leather and eucalyptus, the shelves lined with thick binders labeled in gold foil. She listened without interrupting, eyes scanning the trust documents as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back. "Your position is strong. The clause is clear. If she challenges you, we can defend it." It was the first breath I'd taken in days that didn't catch in my throat. I went home that night and began drafting a personal statement, not for court, but for myself. Every line was a boundary, a reminder that this wasn't about punishing Emily. It was about not allowing her to erase me from my own family's story. 3 days later, the lawyer's number lit up the screen. Her voice was steady, but there was something in it I didn't like. "Sarah, I've been going through the fine print of the trust, and there's something you need to see. There may be a potential loophole. One Emily's lawyer could use, if they find it before we address it." My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of loophole? A pause. The kind that could change everything. The lies Emily wove had to be confronted, and I was ready. The lawyer's warning sat in my mind like a grain of sand, small but sharp enough to keep me awake. If Emily's attorney found that loophole first, everything I'd been holding together could unravel in her favor. The next morning I opened the cedar box again. The letter lay on top, but I pushed it aside and pulled out the folders beneath: bank statements, charity board minutes, emails Caleb had printed and saved. I wasn't looking for sentiment now. I was looking for proof. It didn't take long to see the pattern. Emily's name threaded through decision after decision, and mine was conspicuously absent. Fund allocations approved without my signature. A gala committee vote recorded as unanimous when I hadn't even been invited. Then, tucked between 2 board reports, a spreadsheet of the memorial fund Caleb had started after he died. The column for administrative fees was twice what I remembered. I stared at it until the numbers blurred. Lucas came by that afternoon, carrying a box of hardware store odds and ends, pretending he was here to fix the leaky kitchen tap. He was halfway under the sink when I laid the spreadsheet on the counter. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" He froze, wrench in hand. "Mom, you knew," I said, my voice low but not shaking. "You knew she was cutting me out of decisions, even the fund with your father's name on it." He sat back on his heels, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I was caught between you two. I didn't want to make it worse." I waited. No excuses, he said finally. I should have told you. It wasn't vindication, but it was honesty, and I could work with honesty. The next day, I met with the lawyer again. Her fingers tapped a pen against the desk as I laid out the documents. This is good, she said, messy, but good. If we move now, we can close that loophole before she knows it exists. Do it, I said. She nodded. We'll amend the trust to make the family respect clause airtight. No room for interpretation, no wiggle space. But Sarah, she leaned forward, you have to be prepared. This won't be easy. I've been living with not easy for a long time, I said. When I left her office, the late winter wind cut straight through my coat, but it didn't bother me. The fight had shape now. It had rule. Karen came over that night with takeout cartons and a bottle of wine. We sat cross-legged on the couch, papers spread out between us like a war map. She drew arrows and timelines, connecting events I'd filed away as small slights until they became a single ugly picture. This is who she is when no one's watching, Karen said, capping her pen. And this, I said, tapping the trust clause with my finger, is how it ends. I went to bed early, my mind already rehearsing the next move, what I'd say, how I'd say it, what I'd do when she pushed back. The phone rang just after 10, the number was hers. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity pried me into pressing play before the message even finished recording. Her voice was honeyed at first, the way she spoke to strangers she wanted on her side. Then it's sharp, you don't even deserve to be in the room when the trust is read. This letter wouldn't be for forgiveness, it would be for accountability. I started it before dawn, the kettle still warming on the stove, the street outside washed in that gray-blue light before sunrise. The words came easier than I expected, not cruel but steady. Years of swallowing my own voice had made it sharper, not softer. You've disrespected me for years. If you want to be part of this family, you must act accordingly. I kept going, laying out the boundaries like stakes in the ground. I didn't bother with flowery language or soft edges. It wasn't an invitation, it was a set of terms. Attached to the letter were photocopies of the trust clause Caleb had written and the legal amendment in progress. Facts, not feeling. By the time the clock hit 8, the envelope was sealed and my coffee was cold. I drove to her place without calling first. It wasn't a warning she'd get to prepare. Her street was lined with the kind of houses that always looked staged for a magazine spread. Fresh paint, trimmed hedges, doors in bold colors. Hers was a deep red like it wanted to be noticed. She answered after the second knock, still in silk pajamas and a loose cardigan. The faint smell of expensive coffee drifted out from her kitchen. Mom, the word landed flat, practiced. I have something for you. Her brows arched in mock surprise as I held out the envelope. She didn't take it right away, just leaned against the doorframe, studying me like she was deciding whether to be amused or annoyed. Finally, she plucked it from my hand, tearing the flap with her thumb as she stepped back into the foyer. I followed her in, uninvited but not unwelcome enough to be stopped. She scanned the first lines and that laugh, low, dismissive, slipped out. You think you can control this? No, I said, setting my bag on the console table. I can control me, and I've been silent for too long. This is the moment. Her eyes narrowed. She kept reading, jaw tightening when she reached the photocopied trust documents. You actually went to a lawyer. I'm protecting what's mine, what your father left for all of us, but only if we act like a family. The silence her gaze dropped back to the letter, and then without ceremony she ripped it in half. Once, then again, until the pieces were small enough to scatter onto the polished wood floor like pale confetti. I didn't flinch. Message received, she said, brushing the scraps aside with her foot. You've made your point. I met her eyes, my voice calm enough to startle even me. No, Emily, that was just the first point. She crossed her arms, but there was a flicker of something in her expression, uncertainty maybe, or the faintest recognition that I wasn't bluffing this time. I picked up my bag, stepping toward the door. This won't be the last letter you receive from me. If she wanted a spectacle, I'd give her one on my terms. The morning after Emily tore my letter apart, I woke with the kind of clarity that didn't need coffee to sharpen it. If she was going to spin her story to anyone who'd listen, then I'd tell mine truth, unvarnished, directly to the people who mattered. I started with a group email to the extended family. No accusations, no just a careful timeline of events. Excerpts from Caleb's trust, and my own words about why I was enforcing the clause. I attached scans of the relevant pages, the signatures, the legal amendment in progress. I closed with a single line: I will not be silenced in my own family. By noon, my phone lit up like a switchboard. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years sent messages of support. My sister-in-law called to say she'd always wondered why I'd been absent from so many family decisions. Even Lucas, who had been cautious until now, sent a short text: I've got your back. That night, Karen and I sat at the kitchen table with mugs of chamomile tea, reading through the messages as they poured in. You just pulled the rug out from under her, she said, not hiding her satisfaction, but Emily wasn't going to vanish quietly. The very next day, a cousin forwarded me a screenshot from her social media. Emily's carefully curated post about being betrayed by someone who should have been supportive. She didn't use my name, but she didn't have to. The comment section was already buzzing. At the next family gathering, the tension was visible before I even stepped through the door. Conversations dipped when I entered, some eyes wary, others warmly defiant in their loyalty. Emily was across the room, voice pitched just loud enough for the nearby cluster of relatives to hear. And after everything I've done for her, this is the thanks I get. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even walk toward her. Instead, I spoke with Aunt Marie, then Uncle John, answering their questions directly, looking them in the eye. I could feel Emily's gaze tracking me like a hawk denied its prey. Eventually she approached. So you're making this everyone's business now, she hissed, smile frozen in place for the audience behind her. I'm making sure everyone has the facts, I said, voice even. You're welcome to do the same. Or, I added, letting the pause stretch, we could resolve this in front of the whole family. Mediation, open discussion, nothing hidden. She blinked, caught between indignation and calculation. You're not serious. I'm very serious. You've been telling your side, now I'll tell mine, with you in the room to respond. The idea took root faster than I expected. Within a week, several relatives had agreed to attend. Lucas even offered to host, if it meant everyone would finally hear the full story. The pressure must have been building, because 2 nights before the mediation, I got a call from a blocked number. A voice I recognized instantly. Mark's cousin, David, spoke quickly, low enough that I had to press the phone hard to my ear. I shouldn't be telling you this, he said, but Emily moved some funds from one of Caleb's old investment accounts into a private holding. She did it under the guise of consolidating assets for the wedding. If you can prove it, it could invalidate her claim on the trust entirely. I gripped the edge of the counter, pulse hammering. Do you have proof? I'll send you what I can, he said, and hung up before I could thank him, or ask why he'd chosen now to speak. The email came an hour later. Screenshots. Transaction logs. Enough to make my lawyer's eyes go wide when I forwarded them. I sat in the quiet after sending it, the hum of the refrigerator loud in the stillness. This was no longer just about dignity. It was about exposing what she'd done in front of the very people she'd been trying to sway. The next day Emily called. No preamble, no false sweetness this time. You've made your choice, she said. I'll make mine. If we were going to fix this, it had to be in front of everyone. The meeting was set for a Saturday afternoon in Lucas's living room. Neutral ground, with enough space for a dozen folding chairs and the tension that would fill them. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee and polished wood. Outside, a low winter sun cast thin light through the blinds, striping the carpet in pale gold and shadow. Emily arrived first, her heels clicking against the hardwood, her blazer sharp enough to slice through the air between us. She scanned the room like she owned it, chin lifted, a faint smirk at the corners of her mouth. She sat at the far end of the semicircle of chairs, crossing her legs deliberately. The papers in her lap looked like props too crisp, too untouched. Family members filtered in, the low hum of murmured greetings undercut by the kind of silence that has teeth. Mark came last, a hesitant figure in the doorway, until his eyes found mine. Then he stepped forward and took a seat beside me. I didn't expect the small comfort of that, but it settled something in my spine. The mediator, a woman with a calm voice and wire-rimmed glasses, opened the session. This is an opportunity for each of you to speak openly. Let's begin with Sarah. I rose, not because I needed height, but because I wanted every eye in the room. This isn't about grudges, I said. It's about respect. Caleb's trust includes a condition, one that requires every beneficiary to treat every other as family in word and deed. That hasn't been happening, and I'm here to make it clear that I will not ignore it. Emily shifted in her chair, lips parting like she couldn't help herself. You've twisted that clause to suit your own. I held up a hand, not to silence her, but to anchor myself. You'll have your turn. Then I continued, outlining dates, incidents, and the evidence of her attempts to remove me from decisions, including the recent asset transfer David had exposed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The facts carried their own volume. When I finished, Emily leaned forward, eyes bright and sharp. You're making me out to be the villain. All I've done is protect this family from your overreach. Mark's voice cut in before I could respond. Emily, it was quiet but it cared. I've watched her hold this family together, even when you've pushed her to the edges. I don't agree with everything Sarah does, but I won't stand by and let you pretend this is one-sided. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Emily's cheeks flushed, her control slipping. So you're all just going to gang up on me, she said, voice rising. After everything I've done for you, this isn't about ganging up, I said evenly. It's about holding each other accountable. I'm doing it here in front of everyone, because I want this to be transparent. The mediator raised a hand. Perhaps we can take a step back and consider whether this could be resolved privately. No, I said, before Emily could agree. This has lived in the shadows long enough. Emily gave a short, humorless laugh. You just want an audience. I met her gaze. No, I want the truth in the open. If you think that's dangerous, maybe you should ask yourself why. The mediator glanced between us, her pen pausing above her notepad. Given the complexity of this matter, and the weight of the trust clause, it may be necessary to revisit its terms before any binding decision can be made. The words hung there, tilting the air in the room. It wasn't a ruling, but it was a doorway, one that could open in either direction, and we were all waiting to see who would walk through it first. The choice was made, but it wasn't hers to make. The mediator's gavel-shaped paperweight sat squarely in the center of the table, catching the weak winter light. She adjusted her glasses, scanning her notes one last time before looking up. I've considered the statements, the documents, and the trust language, she said, her voice even but carrying through the room. The clause will remain as written. The trust stands. Beneficiaries must abide by its terms, mutual respect in word and deed, or forfeit their claim. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of reaction, moving through the semicircle of chairs. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my expression calm, though my heart was beating hard enough to feel in my fingertips. Emily sat very still for a moment. Then she let out a soft, incredulous laugh, the kind people use when they're deciding whether to explode or walk away. No, she said finally, her voice clipped. I'm not doing this. I won't live under some manufactured family code just so she can keep her grip on everything. The she was pointed like a knife, but I didn't flinch. From beside me, Mark's chair creaked as he leaned forward. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air. You've made your choice, Emily. Her head snapped toward him. Excuse me? He met her gaze without blinking. You knew the terms. You've known the behavior expected of you, and you've chosen not to meet it. That's on you. The room went still. Lucas, from his seat by the window, shifted as if he wanted to add something, but stopped when my eyes met his. He didn't need to speak. The weight of the moment was already pressing in from all sides. I let a small smile soften my face. Not triumph, not spite, but something steadier. Then it settled. It was, in the simplest terms, the decision had been made, the trust intact, the clause upheld. But it was more than that. It was the family itself quietly choosing which future it wanted. A murmur of agreement passed between my sister-in-law and Aunt Marie. Even Uncle John, who had stayed stubbornly silent throughout, gave a slow nod. Emily pushed her chair back sharply. The legs scraped the hardwood like a protest. She stood, her papers clutched in one hand, her bag in the other. "You're all making a mistake," she said, voice taut with anger. "Don't come to me when you realize what you've done." No one answered. The sound of her heels on the floor was sharper this time, each step like a punctuation mark on a sentence she didn't get to finish. When she reached the door, she paused, maybe to see if anyone would follow. No one. She yanked it open, the winter air rushing in with a cold bite, and slammed it shut behind her. The echo faded, replaced by the soft rustle of people exhaling, shifting, talking quietly. I stayed seated for a moment, letting the quiet Then I reached for the folder in front of me, the trust documents, Caleb's signature still crisp on the last page. I traced the ink with my thumb. It wasn't about winning. It was about keeping his voice alive in the space she'd tried to erase it from. Mark leaned closer. "You okay?" I nodded. "I am now." The mediator began gathering her papers, thanking everyone for their participation. Family members stood, pulling on coats, exchanging subdued goodbye. It wasn't joyous. It wasn't that kind of victory, but there was relief, a shared sense that the bleeding had stopped, even if the wound would scar. As the room emptied, Lucas came to my side. "I'll help with the cleanup," he said. And I knew he wasn't just talking about the coffee cups and folding chairs. By the time the last coat disappeared through the door, the house felt warmer, quieter. I was sliding the trust folder back into my bag when my phone buzzed on the table. One new message. From Emily. "You'll regret this." Regret doesn't come from making the right choice. It comes from staying silent. The weeks after the mediation felt like a slow exhale I'd been holding for years. The house had a different kind of quiet now. Not the brittle stillness of avoidance, but the open air of space reclaimed. Emily's last message, "You'll regret this," sat unread in my phone's archive. I didn't delete it. I didn't need to. It had no power unless I gave it some, and I was done doing that. Lucas came by more often, never with explanations but with small gestures, a bag of groceries left on the counter, fixing the porch light without being asked, standing at the sink drying dishes while we talked about nothing in particular. We didn't touch the wound directly, but we both knew it was there, slowly scabbing over. I filled my days with things that had nothing to do with her. A weekend trip to the coast in early spring, walking along the wet sand with the wind snapping at my scarf. An evening pottery class, where my first bowl came out lopsided, but intact. Lunches with Lorraine, who carried the kind of wisdom you don't get from books. She'd lived enough life to know which battles mattered and which ones were just noise. "You've done the hard part," she said one afternoon over tea. "Now you get to decide who you are without her shadow in the room." It wasn't just her voice that lifted me. A trickle of calls and letters came from extended family, people I hadn't heard from in years, quietly confirming they'd seen Emily's coldness, some even admitting they'd stayed silent because they didn't want to get pulled into the mess. Their apologies didn't erase the past, but they built something new, a kind of quiet solidarity. One morning the mediator called. Her voice was different, warmer, almost conspiratorial. "Sarah, I wanted to let you know something. During the review process, one of our legal clerks found discrepancies in a few estate documents. It appears someone forged your signature." The words seemed to hang in the air before settling like stones in my stomach. "When?" "Last year." Correspondence related to reallocating certain investment accounts. The handwriting analysis is clear. It wasn't you. I didn't have to ask who. My throat tightened, but not with surprise. "Emily," the mediator exhaled, "this could add significant legal weight to your position, especially if she tries to re-enter the claim. I thought you should know." When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table with my hands flat against the wood, letting the news sink in. It wasn't vindication so much as confirmation, an official acknowledgement of the lengths she'd gone to take what wasn't hers. That night, I pulled out Caleb's letter again. His handwriting was as steady as ever, each loop and line a reminder of the life we'd built together, and the boundaries he'd trusted me to protect. For the first time, I felt like I was doing more than just holding the line. I was moving forward. The garden came back to life in April, tulips pushing through the soil like they'd been waiting for my permission. I took long walks in the evening, let the windows stay open longer, filled the rooms with music again. The absence of her presence wasn't a void anymore. It was possibility. Lorraine noticed. "You've stopped bracing," she said one afternoon as we sat on the back steps. "Your shoulders are lower. I think I finally believe she can't touch me anymore," I said, and it was true. 2 weeks later, I came home to find an envelope wedged in the mail slot, heavier than most. No return address, just my name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a single-page letter from a real estate firm I didn't recognize. They'd heard I might be open to selling the house, and they had a client ready, eager, and very interested. It was the same house Emily had once told me should be hers. I set the letter down slowly, my pulse steady but strong. This was more than coincidence. It felt like the next move. The house sold, and I took the first steps toward my new life. The papers were signed on a warm Friday morning, the kind where spring felt close enough to touch. The buyer, a couple in their 30s with a toddler on the way, shook my hand in the lawyer's office, their smiles wide, eager. I matched them, though my smile came slower, as if my heart needed a moment to catch up to my signature on the page. By noon, the funds had hit my account. I didn't celebrate with champagne or a lavish lunch. Instead, I sat in my car in the parking lot with the window down, letting the air wash over me. It was quiet, private, and entirely mine. Lorraine came over that afternoon, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, and a folder tucked under her arm. "You're going to need a plan," she said, spreading maps and travel brochures across my dining table. "Not just for the money, for your time, for your life." We made places I'd always wanted to go. The Amalfi Coast, a train ride through the Scottish Highlands, the Red Rock Canyons of Utah. Things I'd put off, learning Italian, photography classes, finishing the novel I'd started a decade ago. For every destination she added a practical column: budget, travel time, logistics. It wasn't overwhelming, it was exhilarating. That night I walked through the house room by room. The furniture had already been staged for the buyers. My life had been pared down to essentials and keepsakes. In the living room, the fireplace stood empty. In the kitchen, the faint scent of lemon cleaner lingered. Upstairs, sunlight fell across the floorboards where my bed had once been. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like air finally moving through a space that had been shut tight for too long. By the following week I had booked my first trip, 2 weeks in Italy that fall. Not to run away from anything, but to step toward something. I bought a journal for the journey, and a small camera I could tuck into my bag. I signed up for a language app, practicing phrases each morning with my coffee. Lucas helped me box up the last of the items going into storage. We worked quietly, the kind of silence that feels companionable rather than tense. At one point he paused, holding a framed photo of Caleb in his hand. "Feels different," he said softly. "It is different," I replied. And I meant more than the house. As summer rolled in, I found myself at the farmers market on Saturdays, chatting with vendors, buying flowers for no reason other than they made me smile. I spent afternoons at the community art center, clay under my fingernails, my hands shaping bowls and cups that didn't have to be perfect to be worth keeping. The proceeds from the sale weren't just in the bank, they were in my calendar, my plans, my freedom. I didn't need to ask anyone's permission for how I spent my time or my money. The shift was subtle but profound, like a low hum that had been in the background of my life finally going silent. By late November, the trees on my old street had shed their leaves. I drove past the house once, not to linger, just to see it. Through the front window, I caught a glimpse of new furniture, boxes stacked neatly against the wall. The couple stood in the driveway, laughing about something I couldn't hear. It didn't ache the way I thought it. I felt lighter. When December came, I decorated my smaller apartment with simple white lights and a tiny tree on the table. No sprawling holiday dinner, no elaborate guest list, just Lorraine, Lucas, and a handful of people who'd earned their place in my life. We ate, We laughed and there was no undercurrent of tension hiding beneath the clink of silverware. The night after, I was sitting by the window with a book when the phone rang. The number wasn't one I recognized, but something about it tugged at memory. I answered. The voice on the other end paused, as if weighing the first words carefully. Sarah, it's been a long time. He wanted to talk, but I no longer needed his permission. The voice on the phone was familiar enough to make my chest tighten, though not in the way it once had. Sarah, Mark said again, softer this time. I'd like to see you, just to talk. I didn't answer right away. I watched the condensation slide down the side of my water glass, thought about all the conversations we'd never had when it would have mattered. Fine, I said finally. Coffee, public place. We chose a small cafe near the river neutral territory. I arrived first, choosing a table by the window, where the late morning sun spilled across the worn wood. The air smelled of espresso and cinnamon, the quiet hum of conversation a comfortable background. When he walked in, he looked almost exactly the same, coat collar turned up, that same careful way of scanning a room before committing to a direction. His smile was hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to wear it. Sarah, he said again, sliding into the seat across from me. We ordered, though neither of us seemed interested in the drinks. The coffee came, steaming, untouched. He started with an apology, not the grand, sweeping kind, something smaller, more deliberate. I know I should have stepped in sooner, he said, eyes on the table between us. With Emily, with everything. I let him talk, about how he'd thought giving her space would make her kinder. How he'd convinced himself I was strong enough to handle her coldness without him having to choose sides. How loyalty in his mind had meant silence. When he finally looked at me, I said, your explanations don't excuse the pain. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment he didn't speak. I know, he said at last. I'm not asking for you to erase what happened. I'm just asking if we can start over. Slowly, the old me might have jumped at the offer, eager to mend something fractured. But the woman sitting here now didn't feel like she was standing on broken glass. I was on solid ground. I'm open to that, I said, but my life isn't waiting on it. A small smile flickered at the edge of his mouth, something like relief. Fair enough. We talked a little longer about Lucas, about his work, even about the weather, when the other subjects felt too thin to stretch over the silence. When we left, we shook hands instead of hugging. It felt right. The winter air was sharp as I walked back to my car, but it didn't cut, it cleared. I drove home with the windows cracked, the sound of the river in my ears. My apartment was warm when I stepped inside. Lorraine was sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of tea in front of her, and that look she got when she was pretending not to be curious. How was it? She asked. Fine, I said, hanging up my coat. And it was nothing more, nothing less. She slid an envelope across the table toward me. This came for you. Hand-delivered, no return address. The paper was thick, the kind used for wedding invitations or legal summons. My name was written in a hand I didn't recognize, neat, deliberate. Lorraine raised her eyebrows. From someone unexpected, I'd guess. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the faint ridge where the seal pressed into the flap. Whatever was inside, it had waited this long, but something told me it wouldn't wait forever. Not all family is chosen, but not all chosen family betrays you either. The envelope tore open cleanly, the paper inside unfolding with a faint crackle. The handwriting was the same as on the front, neat, deliberate, every loop and line intentional. Dear Sarah, you don't know me well, but I'm Jane's sister. I'm writing because silence has lasted too long, and it's weighed on me. I can't speak for her, but I can say this, she was wrong. Her insecurities are deep, and I'm sure you know where they come from, but they never gave her the right to treat you the way she did. I hope you'll accept this as a small step towards something better, not necessarily forgiveness, but truth. I'm on the board for the annual Hopewell Charity Gala, and I'd like to invite you as my guest. No strings, no expectations. Just an evening surrounded by people who would be glad to see you. Lydia. The page felt heavier than its weight. I read it twice, then set it down and stared at it as though the words might rearrange themselves into something less complicated. She's Jane's sister. Lorraine's voice was steady, but her eyes were sharp. I nodded. I think we met once. Years ago. I remember she seemed different. Lorraine leaned back, studying me. You're wondering if it's bait. I'm wondering if I'd regret going or regret not going. Her smile was faint, but certain. Go. Not for her. Not even for Lydia. Go for you. Walk in there dressed in confidence, not apology. The gala was 3 days away. I didn't tell anyone else. Not even Lucas. I shopped with purpose, a deep green dress that caught the light without glittering, simple gold earrings, and heels I could walk in without thinking about them. On the night of, I fastened my hair back loosely, letting a few strands frame my face. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see someone attending to prove anything. I saw someone who belonged anywhere she chose to be. The Hopewell Center glowed against the winter night, strings of white lights curling along the stone archway. Inside, the air carried the scent of champagne and polished wood, with the faint undercurrent of expensive perfume. I spotted Lydia near the entrance, short hair, bright eyes, wearing a navy gown that skimmed the floor. "Sarah," she said warmly, taking my hands as though we'd known each other for years. "I'm so glad you came." Her sincerity didn't feel She introduced me to people I didn't know, spoke about the charity's work, and left space for me to add my thoughts without rushing me along. It was easy, real. Over the next hour, I moved through the room without shrinking into the corner. I spoke to a man who'd grown up in the neighborhood Caleb and I had once lived in, to a woman who remembered my years volunteering at the library. Every conversation was grounded in the present, not the weight of what had happened. Lydia found me again by the refreshment table. "I'm glad you're here," she said quietly. "I wish it hadn't taken me this long to reach out." "You reached out now," I said. "That's what matters." We smiled, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a performance. I was mid-sip of sparkling water when a shift in the room's energy caught me off guard. The low hum of conversation didn't falter, but I felt the pull of someone's eyes before I turned. She was standing in the doorway, framed by the golden light spilling in from the lobby. Jane. Her gaze swept the room until it locked on mine, and then she froze. They gave me a paper plate. I built a new table. The November air held the crisp edge of wood smoke as I opened my front door to the first guest. The apartment was warm with the slow roasting scent of turkey, cinnamon, and something tangy Lorraine had brought in a cast iron pot. The table stretched the length of the room, cobbled together from mismatched leaves and extra folding tables, dressed in a linen cloth I'd ironed that morning. My fine china gleamed in soft candlelight, not locked away in a cabinet, but set out for hands I trusted. Lorraine was already here, bustling in the kitchen. "Mashed potatoes are in the warming drawer," she announced. "And don't you dare touch that pie cooling by the window, it's for later." I laughed, moving to greet the next wave of arrivals. Neighbors came with bottles of wine, friends with trays wrapped in foil. Lucas arrived, balancing a basket of bread, the steam escaping in warm ribbon. He kissed my cheek without a word, the quiet between us now something tender, not tense. By the time the last chair was filled, the room hummed with voices, layers of conversation overlapping in that comfortable chaos only a good gathering can hold. The fine china clinked softly against the wood as dishes were passed down the table. Green beans with almonds, stuffing rich with sage, roasted vegetables in jewel tones. Halfway through dinner I stood, lifting my glass. The hum dimmed, the way a room leans in when it senses something worth hearing. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice steady, "about how for a long time I accepted the smallest place at someone else's table. I thought if I was patient, it would become mine, but that's not how it works. You can't wait for someone to hand you worth. You have to claim it. Build the table yourself, set it with people who see you, who want you here." A ripple of agreement moved through the room, soft murmurs, a few lifted glasses. "So thank you," I finished, "for being my true family, whether by blood, choice, or chance." I sat and conversation picked back up, warmer now. It was nearly an hour later, in the middle of passing a basket of rolls, that the knock came. It was soft hesitant. I opened the door to find Mark, his coat dusted with the faintest trace of snow, a pie cradled in his hands. I didn't want to intrude, he said, but I wanted to say thank you for letting me try again. I didn't make a speech. I just stepped aside and let him in. He greeted Lucas quietly, set the pie down between Lorraine's cranberry sauce and the basket of bread. No one brought up the past. We didn't need to. The present was enough. Plates filled again, laughter cutting through the clatter of silverware. I caught sight of my china, no longer a fragile symbol of what I'd been denied, but a part of this new tradition, serving people who valued it and me equally. As dessert was passed, Lorraine's pie, Mark's pie, a chocolate cake from the bakery down the street, I leaned back in my chair, letting the sound of it all wash over me. No performance, no undercurrent of barbs wrapped in politeness, just warmth. I lifted my fork, smiling to myself. I've finally been served something real, I murmured. The camera and my mind panned out, the table long and full, faces lit by candlelight, hands reaching across for seconds, the hum of belonging filling the air. Fade out on that table. My table surrounded by the kind of family that doesn't have to be earned, only welcome.